street vendor mocked by wealthy customer until he cites a law and the man freezes. James Wilson took a deep breath as he flipped another sandwich on his griddle. After 15 years working at the same spot in Central Park in Washington, D.C., he knew well the different types of customers who passed by. That's when a man in a grey suit approached the cart with a look of disdain on his face. Robert Thompson eyed the sandwiches as if they were something repulsive. "How disgusting, man. How can you sell this junk here in the middle of the park?" Robert said, shaking his head. "People like you are what make our city ugly. Why don't you get a real job instead of cluttering up the place?" James kept preparing another customer's sandwich without responding. His experience had taught him that ignoring such provocations was the best approach. "I'm talking to you, man," Robert insisted, tapping his fingers on the cart's counter. "Aren't you ashamed of selling this questionable food here? I bet you don't even have a permit." The vendor stopped what he was doing and looked directly at Robert. His voice was calm, but firm. "Sir, I have all my documents in order. And according to Article 5 of the Constitution, combined with the Commercial Activities Act, every worker has the right to dignity and lawful economic activity. What you're doing now constitutes harassment and could be classified as moral harassment against a worker in a vulnerable position." Robert's face instantly paled. He looked around, noticing that some people had stopped to watch the exchange. "Furthermore," James continued, pulling a small notebook from his pocket, "under the Anti-Discrimination Act, any form of discrimination based on social status is a civil offense and can result in liability for damages." Robert swallowed hard. Those weren't the words he expected to hear from a street vendor. "Look here, my friend, I think you're overreacting. You were just, what?" James interrupted, flipping through his notebook. "Because I write down everything that happens here. Date, time, witnesses. This isn't the first case of discrimination I've seen in this park." An elderly woman with white hair who was buying a pastry stepped closer. "I saw everything, dear," Mrs. Jenkins said to James. "This man was very rude to you. James always serves me with the utmost kindness and respect." Robert began to sweat. His business meeting was in 2 hours, and the last thing he needed was legal trouble. "Listen, maybe I was a little too blunt. How about we forget this?" Robert said, pulling out his wallet. "I can even buy something." James shook his head. "It's not about money, sir. It's about respect and dignity." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. Robert took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. He needed to leave quickly, but something in James's determined gaze made him uneasy. "All right, you're right. I apologize. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go," Robert said, turning away. "Mr. Robert Thompson," James called. The businessman froze. How did this man know his name? "We've met before," James said, slowly closing his notebook. "A long time ago." Robert turned back slowly, studying the vendor's face. A strange feeling crept over him, as if a distant memory were trying to surface. "I don't remember where," Robert murmured. "Thompson and Associates Construction. I worked there for 3 years as an administrative assistant. You personally fired me in 2010. The world seemed to spin around Robert. He vaguely remembered that day. He had laid off several employees during the financial crisis, paying little attention to legal procedures. "You kept my termination document signed 15 years ago," James continued, pulling a plastic folder from inside the cart, "along with all the evidence that I was fired without just cause and without receiving my full rights." Robert's legs began to tremble. He remembered perfectly now. James Wilson, an exemplary employee, married, with a sick wife. It had been a rushed dismissal just to cut costs. "James, back then the company was going through tough times. The company was struggling, but you bought a new car that same month," James said, his voice still calm but with a firmness that cut through the air. "Meanwhile, my wife Sarah needed medical treatment I could no longer afford." Mrs. Jenkins stepped closer, sensing the tension. "Son, do you want me to call someone?" she asked, concerned. "No need, Mrs. Jenkins. It's fine," James replied, not taking his eyes off Robert. Robert wiped his face, sweating more and more. His business meeting was about a big contract that could save his company from its financial troubles. A legal scandal was the last thing he needed. James, look, I know I made mistakes in the past, but that was a long time ago. You seem to have done well for yourself. You have your business here. Done well? James almost smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. Mr. Thompson, do you know why I know so much about labor laws? Robert shook his head, afraid of the answer. Because after you fired me, I spent nights studying law on my own. Public libraries, free internet at computer cafes, anywhere I could learn. Not to get revenge, but so I'd never be humiliated again for not knowing my rights. The businessman swallowed hard. And do you know why I needed that job so badly? My wife Sarah was undergoing chemotherapy. The company's health insurance was the only way she could get proper treatment. James's words hit Robert like punches to the gut. He vaguely remembered James mentioning his sick wife on the day of the dismissal, but back then it had just seemed like an excuse to keep his job. James, I didn't know it was that serious. Of course you didn't, because you never asked. To you, I was just a number on the payroll that needed to be cut. A young woman in a blue blazer approached the cart. It was Jennifer Parker, a lawyer who worked at a nearby firm and always bought lunch there. Hi James, is everything okay? Jennifer asked, noticing the tension. Counselor Jennifer, Mr. Thompson here was explaining to me why people like me are a disgrace to the city, James said, keeping his tone respectful but firm. Jennifer looked at Robert with a questioning expression. Excuse me, sir, but I don't understand. Robert felt cornered. Jennifer clearly knew and respected James, and he realized he was in a much worse situation than he'd thought. There's been a misunderstanding, Robert said, forcing a smile. I already apologized. That's not quite how it happened, Mrs. Jenkins interjected. This man was very disrespectful to our James. He said he was a disgrace and should get a real job. Jennifer crossed her arms. I see, and you know that kind of behavior could constitute moral damages, right? Robert began to panic. Two people who clearly knew the law were standing there, and he was at a clear disadvantage. Look, I can compensate for any misunderstanding, Robert said, pulling out his wallet again. Mr. Thompson, James said, shaking his head. 15 years ago, you thought money could solve everything too. You offered me a pittance as compensation and believed you were being generous. Jennifer became more interested in the conversation. You know each other. He was my boss 15 years ago. He fired me without following proper procedures and never paid what he owed. Jennifer looked at Robert with a very serious expression. That's interesting. Labor claims expire after 5 years, but emotional damages don't follow the same statute of limitations. And if there were irregularities in the termination— Counselor, please, Robert interrupted. This can be discussed civilly. Of course it can, Jennifer agreed. James, do you have all the documentation from that time? James nodded, showing his plastic folder. Everything's here. Contracts, pay stubs, termination papers, witnesses from back then. Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His business meeting would start in less than 2 hours, and here he was discussing a 15-year-old labor dispute. James, please, let's settle this amicably. I'll pay what I owe with interest and adjustments, and we'll call it even. It's not just about the money, James said, putting the folder away. It's about acknowledgement. For 15 years, you slept soundly thinking I was just another disposable employee. And you're not, said a voice behind them. Everyone turned. It was Sarah Wilson, James's wife. She had arrived quietly, wearing a colorful headscarf and walking slowly but with determination in her eyes. Sarah, you should be resting, James said, concerned. Not when someone is disrespecting my husband, she replied, staring directly at Robert. Robert felt a tightness in his chest seeing Sarah. She was clearly frail, but there was a strength in her eyes that unsettled him. Ma'am, I've already apologized. You apologized because you got caught, Sarah interrupted, not because you recognized your mistake. Mrs. Jenkins approached Sarah and helped her sit on a nearby bench. My son James is one of the most honorable men I know, Mrs. Jenkins said to Robert. When I faced financial difficulties last year, he gave me food without charging a thing. And when your grandson fell ill, James closed his cart and went with you to the hospital, Jennifer added. Robert looked around. Others were gathering, curious about the commotion. He recognized some as James's regular customers. "It's true," said an older man, stepping forward. "James helped my daughter get a job when she'd been unemployed for months, and he taught me about my rights when my boss tried to cheat me," said a young mother holding a baby. Robert realized he was facing a small community that respected and admired James. The situation was growing more complicated by the minute. "Please, everyone," Robert said, raising his hands. "I understand I made a mistake today. And I acknowledge I may have made mistakes in the past too." "May have?" Sarah questioned with gentle irony. Robert took a deep breath. His business training had taught him never to admit fault publicly, but it was clear that strategy wouldn't work here. "All right, I made serious mistakes in the past, and today I made another mistake by disrespecting James." James looked at his wife, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Mr. Robert, what do you think should happen now?" James asked. Robert thought quickly. His business meeting was crucial, but he was beginning to understand that this situation in the park might be even more important for his future. I'd like to make things right with you, both from the past and today." "How?" asked Jennifer, who had informally taken on the role of mediator. Robert looked at James, trying to see the man behind the street vendor. Behind the justified anger and legal demands, he was beginning to see someone who had suffered real consequences from his business decisions. "James, tell me something. Did you study law after I fired you?" "I did. On my own. I couldn't afford college, but I learned what I needed to know." "And your wife? How is she now?" Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "I've been in remission for 5 years, but it was a very hard fight, especially at the beginning." Robert felt a heavy weight in his chest. He remembered that period of his life as a time of tough but necessary decisions. He had never stopped to consider the human consequences of his choices. "James, I want to do more than just pay what I owe. I want to understand how I can truly help." "What do you mean?" asked James, skeptical. Robert looked around, seeing all those people who clearly respected James. An idea began forming in his mind. "You know labor law better than many attorneys I've met, and you clearly have a talent for leadership and management, seeing how these people respect you." "Where are you going with this?" asked Jennifer. "I'm thinking of a proposal. But first, James, answer me honestly. If you could choose any career today, what would it be?" James hesitated. It was a question he'd asked himself many times over the years. "I'd like to help other workers like me, people who don't know their rights and end up being exploited." Sarah held her husband's hand. James always dreamed of being a lawyer, but life took a different turn. Robert nodded slowly. "What if I offered you the chance to finish your law studies? College paid for, a salary to support your family, all while you work on labor issues." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone looked at Robert with a mix of surprise and distrust. "Why would you do that?" asked James. Robert took a deep breath. It was a question he was still trying to answer himself. "Because 15 years ago I destroyed a good man's life out of greed and ignorance. And today I realized that man has become someone better than I ever was." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Robert's words hung in the air. Sarah wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, while James remained silent, processing the offer. "Mr. Robert," said Jennifer, "this is a very generous offer, but also very sudden. James, do you want some time to think?" "I want to understand better," said James. "Why now? What changed?" Robert looked at the ground, then back at James. "Can I be honest with you?" "Please," said Sarah. "My company is in financial trouble. In 2 hours I have a meeting that could save or sink my business. And here I was humiliating an honest worker. Why? Out of insecurity, fear, arrogance that leads nowhere." Robert paused, looking around at all the people who had gathered. "Do you know the difference between you and the business people I know? You care about each other. You've built a real community. I've only built empty profits." Mrs. Jenkins stepped closer. "Son, sometimes people can change, but actions speak louder than words." "Exactly," James agreed. "Mr. Robert, your proposal is interesting, but I need to see if it's real or just momentary guilt. Robert understood the distrust. He'd doubt such a sudden change too. What would you like me to do to prove I'm serious? James thought for a moment, looking at Sarah. First, I want you to go to your meeting. Go about your business, but I want you to come back here tomorrow at the same time. Why? To talk, really talk, not about money or proposals, about what happened 15 years ago, about the consequences, about what real responsibility means. Robert nodded. I'll come back. And if you're truly interested in change, bring your documentation. I want to see how your company treats employees today. I want to understand if your practices have changed, or if I'd just be an exception to ease your conscience. James's brutal honesty hit Robert like a punch. He realized he'd have to examine not just his past actions, but also his current practices. All right, I'll bring everything. Jennifer approached James. Can I make a suggestion? She asked. Of course, counselor. If you're having this conversation tomorrow, how about I join too? As a lawyer, I can help structure any agreement legally and fairly for both sides. That would be great, said James. Robert checked his watch. He had 90 minutes left before his crucial meeting. James, I have to go now, but before I do, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How did you manage to forgive? After everything you went through, how can you stand here calm, offering a second chance? James looked at Sarah, who smiled encouragingly, urging him to answer. Mr. Thompson, I didn't forgive because you deserved it. I forgave because I deserved peace. Carrying anger for 15 years wasn't going to change the past, but maybe this conversation can change the future. Robert felt a lump in his throat. He extended his hand to James. See you tomorrow, then. James shook his hand. See you tomorrow. Robert started to walk away but turned back once more. Sarah, can I ask, did you manage to heal? I did, she replied, touching the scarf on her head. But it wasn't just the medical treatment. It was having a husband who never stopped fighting for me. That makes all the difference. Robert nodded and walked off, heading quickly toward the parking lot. His mind was in turmoil, mixing anxiety about the upcoming meeting with a jumble of emotions about the encounter in the park. As he drove to the office, Robert couldn't stop thinking about James's words. I forgave because I deserved peace. When was the last time he, Robert, had felt real peace? His company, Thompson & Associates, occupied 2 floors of a commercial building in downtown Washington, D.C. When he entered, Robert mechanically greeted the receptionist and went straight to his office. On his desk were the contracts for the meeting, a major construction project that could put the company back in the black, but it would also mean laying off at least 20 employees to cut costs. Robert looked at the list of names to be let go. For the first time in years, he tried to picture each person's face, their families, their circumstances. Did any of them have a sick spouse, young children, dreams that would be shattered by his decision? His phone rang. It was Michael, his business partner and eldest son. Dad, the clients are here. Are you ready? I'm on my way up now, Robert replied. In the conference room, 3 executives were waiting. The contract was worth $15 million, spread over 2 years. It was exactly what the company needed. Mr. Thompson, said the lead executive, William Stevenson, we've reviewed your proposal, and it looks very good. We just have one concern. Robert's stomach tightened. What would that be? The timeline. Can you guarantee you'll have enough manpower to deliver everything on schedule? Robert glanced at Michael, who nodded confidently. Of course, we have an experienced team and can adjust our workforce as needed. Adjust how? Asked another executive. Michael answered without hesitation. Strategic layoffs, temporary hires, outsourcing. Whatever it takes to optimize costs and productivity. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. A few hours ago, those words would have seemed perfectly normal. Now, after his conversation with James, they sounded cold and inhuman. Mr. Thompson, called William Stevenson, you seem concerned about something. Robert shook his head, trying to focus. No, everything's fine. It's just, well, layoffs are always a delicate decision. The executives exchanged glances. Michael looked at his father with confusion. Dad, layoffs are a normal part of business. You've always said that. Yes, I know, it's just... Robert hesitated. Have any of you stopped to think about the human impact of these decisions? The silence in the room was uncomfortable. William cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, we understand HR matters can be sensitive, but we're here to do business. Are you all right? Robert realized he was derailing the negotiation, but something inside him couldn't simply ignore what had happened in the park. Forgive me. It's just that today I had an experience that made me reflect on how our business decisions affect real people. Michael quickly interjected, My father is very socially conscious, but that doesn't interfere with our business efficiency. Of course, said William, but Robert detected skepticism in his voice. The meeting continued for another hour. Robert signed the contract, but his mind was divided. Part of him was relieved to have saved the company. Another part couldn't stop thinking about the list of layoffs he'd have to implement. When the clients left, Michael stayed behind. Dad, what was that? You almost ruined everything with that talk about human impact. Robert sank heavily into his chair. Michael, answer me something. Have you ever stopped to think about who these people we're laying off really are? They're employees, Dad. Numbers on a spreadsheet. So if we don't cut costs, we'll have to shut down the company and let everyone go. But they have families, dreams, problems. Michael stepped closer to the desk, concerned. Dad, are you okay? Since when do you worry about this? Robert looked at his son. Michael was 32 with a business degree and an MBA abroad. Exactly the kind of executive Robert had been at 32. Michael, do you know a street vendor named James Wilson? No. Why? He worked here. I laid him off in 2010. So? You must have laid off hundreds since then. He was at the park where I have lunch today, and he made me realize some things about how we run our business. Michael crossed his arms. What kind of things? That maybe our decisions have consequences we've never stopped to consider. Dad, that's sentimentalism. Business is business. You always taught me that. Robert looked at his son and saw himself 20 years younger. The same coldness, the same certainty that profit justified any means. Maybe I taught you wrong, Robert murmured. What do you mean? Michael, that man James almost lost his wife because I fired him irresponsibly. He had to abandon a promising career to sell food on the street, and yet he became a better person than I am. Michael shook his head. Dad, you can't be responsible for every former employee's life. That's impossible. But I can be responsible for how I treat people today. Robert pulled out the layoff list. Michael, I want you to bring me detailed profiles of every person on this list. Family situation, tenure, performance, everything. Why? To see if we can find other ways to cut costs without destroying lives. Michael sighed. Dad, this will be a lot of work and might not change anything. The numbers are clear. Then let's do the work. If after reviewing everything there's no alternative, at least we'll know we tried. Michael left the room shaking his head. Robert was left alone, gazing out the window at the city. Somewhere down below, James was closing up his cart, probably taking Sarah home. For the first time in years, Robert wondered if there was any real difference between the money he earned and the satisfaction James showed in his work. That evening, Robert arrived home later than usual. His wife, Catherine, was watching television in the living room. How was the meeting? She asked without taking her eyes off the screen. We closed the deal. Great, how much? 15 million over 2 years. Catherine smiled. Finally, some good news. I was starting to worry about our finances. Robert sat down beside her. Catherine, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember 2010 when we had to make those layoffs? Catherine finally looked at him. I remember. It was a tough time. Why? Do you recall if I mentioned any specific employee? A man named James Wilson? Catherine thought for a moment. I don't remember the name, but I do remember you were off for a few days after the layoffs. You said an employee had mentioned his sick wife, and you felt terrible. Robert was surprised. He had completely forgotten telling Catherine that. What else did I say? That it was better not to dwell on it, or you wouldn't be able to make the decisions needed to save the company. And you agreed. Catherine shrugged. At the time, yes. We were worried about our own problems. The company nearly bankrupt. Michael still in college, all the bills to pay. Robert nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand how he had justified his actions over the years. Catherine, do you think we're good people? The question caught her off guard. What a strange question. Of course we are. We don't harm anyone. We fulfill our obligations. We raised our children right. But what about the people we affect indirectly? The employees we let go, the suppliers we pressured, the communities where we built? Catherine looked at him with concern. Robert, where are these questions coming from? Did something happen today? Robert told her about his encounter with James. Catherine listened in silence. And you believe him? She asked when he finished. I do. And the worst part is, I remember him now. I remember the look of desperation when I told him I couldn't do anything for him. Catherine sighed. Robert, you can't change the past. And if you start blaming yourself for every business decision you've made, you'll drive yourself mad. But I can change the future. How? Robert told her about the offer he had made to James. You offered to pay for his education? Catherine looked at him in disbelief. Robert, that's years of tuition, plus salary, plus benefits. It's a lot of money. Money we have now, thanks to today's contract. But it's money we could use for other things, for our financial security, for Emily's studies abroad. Robert looked at his wife. Emily was their youngest, 19 years old, who dreamed of studying design in Italy. Catherine, do you think Emily would be a worse person if she had to earn her dreams through her own effort like James is doing? That's not the point, Robert. Our children are our priority, not former employees. And what if our children learned that helping others is important too? Catherine shook her head. You're having a midlife crisis, Robert. It'll pass. What if it's not a crisis? What if it's me finally seeing things clearly? They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. Robert, Catherine finally said, if you really want to do this, I won't stop you. But think carefully about the consequences. For our family, for our company, for our future. I'm thinking. For the first time in years, I'm really thinking. The next morning, Robert woke up early. He had spent the night barely sleeping, going over his entire business career. How many decisions had he made thinking only about profit? How many people had been affected without him ever caring? He arrived at the office before anyone else and asked Michael to bring the profiles of the employees who would be laid off. When Michael arrived with the folder, Robert was startled by the amount of information. There are 20 people, said Michael, placing the folder on the desk. 15 men, 5 women. Ages between 23 and 56. Robert opened the folder and began to read. George Miller, 42 years old, married, 3 children, has worked at the company for 8 years. Excellent performance review. Amanda Johnson, 28 years old, single, supports her elderly mother, has a degree in engineering, hired 2 years ago. Michael, these profiles show we're letting go of good employees just to cut costs. Dad, I warned you it would be hard, but the numbers don't lie. Either we cut these salaries or we can't meet the deadlines for the new contract. Robert kept reading. With each profile, he saw a real person with real problems and real responsibilities. What if we found other ways to save? Temporary salary reductions for the board, renegotiating with suppliers, process optimization. Dad, that would be a very small reduction compared to what we need, and salary cuts could demotivate the team. But layoffs don't demotivate, Michael sighed. They demotivate those who stay temporarily, but eventually they get used to it. It's always like that. Robert looked at his son. They get used to it. That phrase deeply troubled him. Michael, I want you to run a simulation. How much would we save if you and I cut our salaries by 50% for a year? Dad, that's absurd. We have responsibilities, financial commitments. How much, Michael? Michael did some quick calculations. $200,000 a year. We'd still be short at least $800,000. What if we sold some company assets? Those 2 executive cars we bought last year, for example. Dad, that would hurt our corporate image. Is our corporate image more important than the jobs of 20 families? Michael looked at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. Dad, honestly, I don't understand this sudden change. Since yesterday, You've been acting like a social worker, not a businessman. Robert closed the folder. Michael, maybe it's time I learned to be both. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. At 2 in the afternoon, Robert was back at the park. James had just opened his cart and was organizing the ingredients when he saw Robert approaching. I thought you wouldn't come, said James. I always keep my word, replied Robert, carrying a large folder. I brought everything you asked for. Jennifer arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by Sarah. The two had met on the way and talked about the situation. Well, let's talk, said James, motioning for everyone to sit on the benches near the cart. Robert opened his folder. Here's everything. Current employment contracts, termination policies, employee records from the last 5 years. I want you to see exactly how my company operates. Jennifer took some documents and began reviewing them. James, do you want to take a look too? James nodded and started examining the papers alongside Jennifer. The silence was heavy as they read. Mr. Robert, said Jennifer after a few minutes, some of these contracts have problematic clauses. How so? Excessively long probation periods, benefits below legal standards, abusive penalties if the employee breaks the contract. Robert felt his face flush. Our lawyer said everything was within the law. It is within the law, agreed James, but it's the bare minimum. In other words, you only do what's mandatory, nothing beyond that. Sarah stepped closer. May I ask you something, Mr. Robert? Why do you want to change now? Robert took a deep breath. Because last night I realized I've become exactly the kind of person I criticized when I was young. How so? Asked Jennifer. When I was 20, I hated business owners who treated employees like numbers. I swore I'd be different when I had my own company. Robert paused, looking at his hands. But little by little, financial pressures, competition, the need to survive in the market, all of that changed my perspective. And I didn't even notice when I became what I always despised. James studied him for a moment. And now what changed? You. Yesterday, seeing how the people in the park respect you, how your wife supports you, how you turned a difficult situation into something dignified, made me realize I lost something along the way. What did you lose? Asked Sarah. The ability to take real pride in what I do. For years I've made money, but I haven't felt true satisfaction. Yesterday, watching you, I realized what it means to have real purpose. Jennifer made a few notes. Mr. Robert, is your proposal from yesterday still on the table? It is, more than ever. Then let's structure this properly, she said. James, would you be willing to start as a consultant for the company, focusing on labor issues and human relations? James looked at Sarah, who nodded. I would, but I have conditions. What are they? Asked Robert. First, I want full autonomy to review and suggest changes to all the company's human resources policies. Agreed. Second, if I find practices I consider abusive, I want authorization to implement changes, even if it costs money. Robert hesitated. That condition could be expensive. Third, James continued, I want any savings my consulting generates to be split evenly between employee improvements and company profits. Robert looked at Jennifer. Is that legally feasible? Absolutely, and it's a very smart proposal. James would have financial incentive to find solutions that benefit everyone. Robert extended his hand to James. I accept all your conditions. James shook his hand. Then we have a deal. Sarah smiled, wiping away a tear. May I make a suggestion? She said. Of course, Robert replied. What if James starts by reviewing this list of layoffs you're planning? It could be a good test to see if you can work together. Robert reopened his folder and showed the profiles of the 20 employees. I need to cut $800,000 in costs over the next year. My son calculated that letting these people go would be the quickest way. James took the list and began reviewing it. Mr. Robert, may I have access to the company's complete financials, revenues, expenses, profit margins? Why? To understand where the real problems are. Sometimes the solution isn't cutting employees, but optimizing processes. Robert called Michael and asked him to bring the full numbers. Michael arrived, clearly irritated by the whole situation. "Dad, this is confidential company information." "Michael, this is James Wilson, our new human resources consultant. James, this is my son Michael, a partner in the company." Michael looked at James with disdain. "The hot dog vendor? Dad, are you serious?" The embarrassment in the air was palpable. James stood up. "Perhaps I should introduce myself properly," he said, extending his hand to Michael. "My name is James Wilson. I worked at your father's company for 3 years as an administrative assistant. For the past 15 years, I've studied labor law on my own. I know the legislation better than most lawyers and have practical experience in negotiation and people management." Michael reluctantly shook his hand. "And you're going to teach me how to run a business?" "No," James replied calmly. "I'll help your company treat employees like human beings, not numbers on a spreadsheet." The tension between them was obvious. Robert noticed he'd have to deal with his son's resistance on top of all the other challenges. "Michael, James will review our layoff proposal. I want you to cooperate with him." "Dad, this is ridiculous. A street vendor reviewing our business decisions?" "A labor rights expert reviewing our HR policies," Robert corrected firmly. Michael shook his head and handed the financial documents to James. "I hope you know what you're doing, Dad." When Michael walked away, Jennifer approached Robert. "You're going to have trouble with your son." "I know. But maybe it's time he learned some lessons that took me 15 years to understand." James studied the numbers for nearly an hour, taking notes and making calculations. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Robert, I've found a few issues." "What are they?" "First, you're spending a fortune on suppliers who provide low-quality services. Second, you have many inefficient processes that create rework and waste. Third, employee turnover is costing you dearly in training and recruitment." Robert grew interested. "And do you have solutions?" "I have some ideas, but I'll need time to analyze everything properly." "How much time?" "A week for a preliminary diagnosis, a month for a complete plan." "What about the layoffs?" "Suspend them for now. If I can find the necessary savings without firing anyone, would you agree?" Robert looked at Jennifer and Sarah, then back at James. "We agree." Jennifer smiled. "Then let's formalize this. I'll prepare a proper consulting contract." Sarah stood up and hugged James. "I'm proud of you," she whispered in his ear. Robert watched the couple. There was something about their relationship that moved him deeply, a mutual support, a real partnership he felt he'd lost in his own marriage over the years. "James, may I ask something personal?" "Of course." "How have you kept your marriage strong through all these difficult years?" James and Sarah exchanged glances. "We never stopped talking," Sarah answered. "Even in the worst moments, we always talked about our fears, our dreams, our plans. And we never put money above our relationship," James added. "We always knew we were more important than any financial success." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. When was the last time he and Catherine had had a truly deep conversation? "Do you have children?" Robert asked. "We couldn't," Sarah replied with a sad smile, "because of medical treatment. But James always said helping others was our way of caring for the world." Robert understood why James had become a respected figure in the park. He and Sarah had turned their pain into compassion for others. "Good," Jennifer said, gathering her papers. "I think we have a plan. Robert, are you prepared for significant changes in your company?" "I am." "James, are you prepared to face resistance, especially from Michael?" "I am." "I've faced worse." Jennifer smiled. "Then let's start transforming this company." When Robert got home that night, he found Catherine and Emily having dinner. Emily had come home from college for the weekend. "Dad," she said, standing up to hug him, "Mom told me you landed a big contract. Congratulations." Robert hugged his daughter, feeling a special tenderness for her. Emily had inherited his sensitivity, not just his ambition. "Thank you, sweetheart. How are your studies going?" "Good. Actually, I wanted to talk to you both about Italy." Robert and Catherine exchanged glances. "What about Italy?" asked Catherine. "I got a partial scholarship to study design in Florence, but I need to show proof of family income to supplement the funding." Robert felt his stomach tighten. With the new expenses he'd taken on for James, he might not be able to help Emily as he'd planned. How much do you need? He asked. How about $50,000 a year for 2 years? Robert did the math in his head. It was exactly the amount he'd intended to invest in James's education. Dad? Emily noticed his hesitation. Is something wrong? Robert looked at the two most important women in his life. How could he explain he was rethinking his priorities? Emily, let me tell you something that happened yesterday, he said, pulling up a chair. He recounted the whole story of meeting James, the offer he'd made, and the commitments he'd taken on. Emily listened carefully. So you're going to pay for his law school? She asked when he finished. I am, and that might affect our ability to help you with Italy. Emily was silent for a moment. Dad, can I meet this James? Why? Because if you believe in him enough to change your whole outlook on business, I want to understand why. Catherine interjected. Emily, your father is going through a phase. This shouldn't affect your studies. Mom, I want to hear his opinion, Emily said, looking at Robert. What do you think I should do? Robert took a deep breath. This was one of the hardest questions he'd ever faced. Emily, I think you should meet James and Sarah. Talk to them. Then decide whether you want me to give you the money for Italy, or if you'd rather earn it through your own efforts. Robert, Catherine protested, she's our daughter. It's our duty to help her. It's our duty to teach her to be a person of integrity, Robert corrected. And maybe that's more important than handing her everything on a silver platter. Emily smiled. Dad, I want to meet them, and I want to understand what changed you so much. Then tomorrow you'll come with me to the park. Catherine stood up from the table, clearly annoyed. You're both crazy, giving up real opportunities for cheap sentimentality. Catherine, Robert called, have you ever stopped to think if our opportunities were earned fairly? What do you mean by that? I mean, maybe our success came at too high a cost for other people, and maybe it's time we paid that debt. Catherine shook her head and left the room. Emily stayed with Robert. Dad, are you okay? I'm better than I've been in years, sweetheart. Even risking all this? Robert looked at Emily. She'd grown up privileged, but had always shown a social awareness he admired. Emily, do you remember when you were little and always asked me why some people were poor and others rich? I do. And I always said it was because some people worked harder than others. Yes. Well, I was wrong. Or at least I was only telling half the story. Emily moved closer. What's the other half? The other half is that sometimes rich people stay rich because they prevent others from progressing. And I did that for years without realizing it. And now you want to make amends? Robert thought about the question. It's not exactly redemption. It's more evolution. I want to become a better person than I was. Emily smiled and kissed her father's forehead. Then I support you, and I want to meet James tomorrow. The following morning, Robert and Emily arrived at the park together. James was preparing the first snacks of the day when he saw them approaching. James, this is my daughter Emily, said Robert. Nice to meet you, Emily, said James, wiping his hand on his apron before extending it. The pleasure is mine. My father told me about you. Where's Sarah? She'll come later. She's still recovering from treatment. Emily watched James working. There was something about the dedicated and careful way he prepared the food that impressed her. Can I help? She asked. James smiled. Of course. Can you cut these tomatoes while I prepare the onion? Robert observed his daughter working side by side with James. There was a naturalness in their interaction that surprised him. Mr. Robert, James said as he worked, I analyzed some more numbers last night. I have news. Good or bad? Good, very good. Jennifer arrived at that moment carrying a laptop. Good morning, everyone. James, I prepared the consulting contract. Want to take a look? While James and Jennifer reviewed the contract, Emily chatted with Mrs. Jenkins, who had arrived to buy her morning snack. So, you're Robert's daughter? Asked Mrs. Jenkins. I am. Your father is a good man. Yesterday, he admitted his mistakes and is trying to make things right. That's rare these days. Emily glanced at her father, who was talking seriously with James about numbers and spreadsheets. Mrs. Jenkins, do you know James well? I've known him for years. He's a man of character. When my grandson got sick, he helped me find free medical care. He knows all the rights we ordinary people have. And Sarah? A saint. Even while sick, she always helped other women going through similar struggles. They're an example of how to stay strong in adversity. Emily absorbed this. She was starting to understand why her father had been so impressed by the couple. "James," Robert called, "what's the news you mentioned?" James stopped reading the contract and stepped closer. "I found at least $300,000 in obvious waste. Overpriced contracts, inefficient processes, unnecessary rework." "How so?" "For example, you pay 40% more to a supplier that delivers inferior quality materials. That leads to rework, which costs extra time and money." Jennifer became interested. "And have you identified alternative suppliers?" "I found 3 better and cheaper options. You could save at least $200,000 just by making that change." Robert was impressed. "You found all this in a week?" "Mr. Robert, when you need to save every penny to survive, you develop an eye for waste. You throw money away on things you don't even notice." Emily stopped cutting tomatoes. "James, can I ask you something? How did you learn so much about management?" "By observing and studying. When you work 15 years selling food, you learn about suppliers, inventory control, customer service, financial management, all hands-on." "What about law?" "Necessity. After I was wronged, I swore I'd never be ignorant of my rights again. And if I wasn't going to be ignorant, I could help others not to be either." Robert watched Emily asking James thoughtful questions. She was genuinely interested in learning from him. "Emily," Robert said, "what do you think of the offer I made to James?" Emily thought for a moment. "I think it's the right thing to do, but I also think you shouldn't do it just out of guilt." "Why then?" "Because James can really help your company be better, and because he deserves the opportunity you took from him 15 years ago." Sarah arrived at that moment, walking slowly but smiling as she saw all the activity around the food stand. "Emily, this is my wife, Sarah," said James. "Sarah, nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you." Sarah hugged Emily warmly. "And I about you. Your father said you want to study in Italy." "I do. Design. It's always been my dream." "And will you make it happen?" Emily looked at her father, then back at Sarah. "I'm reconsidering. Maybe it's better if I earn it on my own." Sarah smiled. "You know, Emily, there's no shame in accepting help from family. The question is what you do with that help afterward." "What do you mean?" "Whether you use the opportunity only for your own benefit or to help others too." Emily thought about those words. "Sarah, can I ask, weren't you bitter about everything you went through?" Sarah and James exchanged glances. "At first, yes," admitted Sarah, "especially me. I was so angry at people who had it easy while we struggled to survive." "What changed?" "I realized anger is poison you drink hoping the other person dies. It solved nothing, it only made me suffer more." James added, "And we discovered our hardships gave us something valuable. Real empathy for others who suffer. That's a kind of wealth money can't buy." Robert felt tears in his eyes. These people had found a wisdom he'd never sought. "Jennifer," he said, "can we sign this contract now?" "We can. I have 2 copies here." Robert signed James's consulting contract. Then Emily approached him. "Dad, I've decided what I want to do about Italy." "What?" "I want you to lend me the money, not give it. I'll study there, but when I return, I'll work to pay back every penny." Robert smiled. "Are you sure?" "I am. And once I've paid it all back, I want to use what I've learned to help other young people achieve their dreams too." Sarah clapped. "Now that's the right attitude." James stepped closer to Robert. "Mr. Robert, can I start at the company this Monday?" "You can. But just call me Robert, please. We're partners now." "Deal, Robert." Jennifer put away the documents. "Well, officially, James Wilson is now the Human Resources Consultant for Thompson & Associates." Mrs. Jenkins, who had observed everything, approached. "Can I offer you some advice?" "Of course," said Robert. "Real change takes time. Some will resist. There'll be obstacles. There'll be tough moments. But if you stay focused on what's right, not what's easy, it'll all work out." Robert nodded. He knew the challenges were just beginning. Michael was resistant. Catherine was skeptical. And he'd have to prove to the whole company that this change was real and lasting. But for the first time in years, Robert felt he was on the right path. with the right people beside him for the journey. On Monday morning, James arrived at the Thompson & Associates building wearing a simple but presentable suit. Robert had arranged an office for him on the second floor. The receptionist, Jessica, eyed him curiously when he introduced himself. "Good morning. I'm James Wilson, the new human resources consultant." "One moment, please," said Jessica, calling Robert. "Mr. Robert, there's a gentleman here who says he's the new consultant." "Send him up, Jessica, and from today Mr. James has full access to the building." When James reached the second floor, Robert was waiting. "How do you feel on your first day?" asked Robert. "Nervous but confident," replied James. Robert showed him around. The company occupied 2 floors with about 40 employees divided between administration, engineering, and construction. "James, I want to introduce you to the team, but first I should warn you, not everyone is thrilled about your arrival." "I expected that. Change always meets resistance." They entered the meeting room, where Michael had called the main managers to meet the new consultant. "Everyone," said Robert, "this is James Wilson, our new human resources consultant. He will review our policies and suggest improvements." The managers greeted James politely, but he sensed skepticism on several faces. "James Guyan," said Michael, "can you tell us a bit about your previous experience?" It was clearly a provocative question. James replied calmly, "I worked here for 3 years as an administrative assistant. For the past 15 years, I've studied labor law on my own and gained practical experience in management and negotiation through my own business." "What kind of business?" asked Susan, the finance manager. "A street vendor in Central Park?" The silence in the room was awkward. Some managers exchanged surprised glances. "I see," said Michael with an ironic smile. "And now you're going to teach us about business management?" "I'm here to help you understand that satisfied employees are more productive and that fair policies reduce costs in the long run," James replied, keeping his composure. Richard, the operations manager, spoke up. "James, with all due respect, managing a company with 40 employees and millions in revenue is very different from selling snacks in the park." "You're right," James agreed. "It's much more complex. That's why I'm here to learn too. But the basic principles of treating people with dignity and respect are the same, no matter the size of the operation." Robert intervened. "Everyone, I want to make it clear that James has my full support. His suggestions will be implemented as long as they're financially viable." "Dad," Michael said, "can we talk in private?" Robert and Michael left the meeting room. "Dad, this is humiliating," Michael said, as soon as they were alone. "How am I supposed to explain to our clients that our HR consultant is a hot dog vendor?" "Michael, you'll explain that we hired a competent person to improve our labor policies." "But Dad," "Michael, listen to me. I want you to give James a real chance. Work with him, test his ideas. If in 3 months he doesn't show concrete results, we'll reassess." Michael sighed. 3 months? 3 months. When they returned to the room, James was explaining his initial observations about the company to the managers. "After reviewing the documents, I've identified some areas that can be improved immediately," he said. "For example, the overtime policy is creating unnecessary costs because there's no proper schedule planning." Susan was intrigued. "How so?" "You often end up paying overtime not because there's more work, but because the work wasn't efficiently distributed during regular hours." Richard chimed in. "But construction projects have tight deadlines. Sometimes there's no way around it." "I agree," said James, "but after reviewing the records, I see that 30% of overtime could be avoided with better planning." "And do you have suggestions?" Susan asked. "I have some ideas, but first I'd like to talk to the construction workers to better understand the practical challenges." Michael shook his head. "James, you can't just come in here and want to change everything." "I don't want to change everything," James replied patiently. "I want to understand everything first, then suggest gradual improvements." Robert liked James's approach. "Michael, why don't you accompany James when he talks to the employees? That way you can see firsthand how he works." Michael couldn't refuse without seeming completely obstructive. "Fine. When do you want to start?" he asked James. "Now, if possible." They went downstairs to the ground floor, where the administrative employees' offices were located. James introduced himself to each person. asking about their roles, challenges, and suggestions. "Mrs. Patricia," he said to the longest-serving employee, "how long have you worked here?" 12 years, young man. "And how would you rate the work environment?" Patricia glanced nervously at Michael. "You can speak freely, Patricia," said Michael. "Your opinion matters to us." "Well, it's a good job. Pay is on time, basic benefits, but sometimes I feel I could be better utilized." "How so?" asked James. "I have a technical degree in accounting, but I only handle filing and phone calls. I think I could contribute more." James took notes. "Do other colleagues feel this way too?" "Some do. Brian over there, for example, has a degree in business administration, but only handles document filing." Michael watched James guide the conversations. There was something in the respectful, attentive way he listened to the employees that even impressed Michael. They spent the entire afternoon talking to different departments. James asked direct but non-invasive questions, and the employees seemed comfortable speaking openly. By the end of the day, James had 4 pages of notes. "What did you think?" asked Robert when they met in his office. "You have very capable employees who are underutilized," James replied, "and there are communication gaps between departments causing redundant work." "Examples?" asked Michael. "Patricia has the skills to assist in accounting, but is doing tasks that could be handled by someone less qualified. Brian could help with administration, freeing up managers for more strategic matters." Robert grew interested. "Would that save money?" "Yes. You could redistribute roles more efficiently, reduce overtime, and boost productivity without hiring anyone new." Michael crossed his arms. "And the reorganization costs?" "Minimal. It's mostly about reassigning responsibilities and training people for new roles." Robert smiled. "James, how long do you need to draft a full plan?" 2 weeks for a detailed plan, but I can start implementing simple changes as early as next week." "Do it." When James left, Michael stayed behind with his father. "Dad, I'll admit he seems to know what he's doing." "Just seems." "All right, he knows. But I still think it's risky giving so much authority to someone we barely know." Robert looked at his son. "Michael, what do you know about James, besides the fact that he was a street vendor?" "Almost nothing." "Then how about getting to know him better before judging?" The following week, James began implementing the first changes. He reassigned some roles, created a more efficient communication system between departments, and set up weekly progress meetings. The results were immediate. Overtime dropped by 20% in the first week. Productivity visibly increased because employees felt more valued and properly utilized. Michael was impressed, but still skeptical. "Could be beginner's luck," he told his father. "Let's see if he can sustain this." Robert decided it was time for Michael to learn more about James's story. "Michael, I want you to join me for lunch in the park today." "The park? Why?" "So you can see the environment where James worked all these years." They arrived at the park at lunchtime. James's cart was being run by a young man Robert didn't recognize. "Where's James?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, who was buying a pastry. "He's working at a company now," Robert replied. "I'm his boss, Robert." "Ah, the famous Robert." Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "James speaks very highly of you." Michael watched the interaction with curiosity. "Mrs. Jenkins, this is my son, Michael. Pleasure to meet you, son. Do you work with your father at the company?" "Yes, I do. That's wonderful. Your father is a good man. He admitted he'd made mistakes with James and is trying to make things right." Michael began to realize there was a more complex story here. "Mrs. Jenkins," said Robert, "could you tell Michael how you met James?" "Of course, I met James about 10 years ago. He's always been so polite, always treated me with kindness. When my grandson fell ill, he was the one who helped me find free medical care." "How did he know about that?" asked Michael. "James knows all the rights we ordinary folks have. He studied hard for that. He's always helped everyone here in the park with work issues, health concerns, paperwork." Michael looked around. Others had gathered when they noticed Robert was there. "Are you James's boss now?" asked a young mother. "I am. And this is my son, Michael." "That's wonderful. James deserves a better opportunity. He's always been so generous with everyone here." "How so?" Michael asked. "When I was unemployed, he gave me free food for months, said that when I got back on my feet, I could help someone else. An older man stepped forward. James helped me settle a labor dispute with my former employer. I got benefits I didn't even know I was owed. Michael was starting to understand why his father had been so impressed by James. "And Sarah?" Robert asked. "How did you all meet her?" "Sarah is a sweetheart," said Mrs. Jenkins. "Even during her treatment, she always helped other women going through similar struggles. She and James are examples of how to stay strong through hardship." After lunch, Michael and Robert walked through the park. "Dad, I had no idea about all this. Now you see why I was so impressed?" "I do. James really built a solid reputation here. And more importantly, he did it without expecting anything in return. Just out of kindness and a sense of community." Michael thought about that. "Dad, can I admit something?" "Of course." "I was prejudiced. When you said you were hiring a street vendor, I thought it was crazy. But seeing the results at the company and learning more about him, I'm changing my mind." Robert smiled. "Son, we all have biases. What matters is being willing to reconsider them when we get new information." "So now what? How do we move forward?" "Now we give James our full support to implement his ideas, and we learn from him how to be better businessmen." That afternoon, when they returned to the company, they found James meeting with the construction crew. He was explaining a new task planning system. "If we organize the work this way," James said, pointing to a simple diagram, "we can cut each stage's time by 10%. "And if it doesn't work?" asked one of the workers. "We test it on a small project first. If it works, we expand. If not, we go back to the old method." Richard, the construction manager, was paying close attention. "James, this idea makes sense. Can we test it at the Maple Street site?" "Perfect. It's a small project, ideal for a trial." Michael stepped forward. "James, can I oversee this test?" "Of course, Michael. Your experience will be valuable for fine-tuning the details." Robert watched his son and James interact. It was clear Michael was beginning to genuinely respect the new consultant. In the weeks that followed, the changes at the company became even more evident. Employee morale improved visibly, productivity kept rising, and costs began to drop steadily. James had implemented a worker suggestion system, regular feedback meetings, and fairer policies for internal promotions. All this without spending any extra money, just by reorganizing processes. "James," said Robert on a Friday, "I want to see the consolidated numbers for the first month." James prepared a detailed presentation. The results were impressive: a 25% reduction in overtime, a 15% increase in productivity, 0 labor complaints, and total savings of $120,000. "This is amazing," said Michael. "How did you achieve these results so quickly?" "It wasn't me," replied James. "It was the employees. They always knew how to do the job better. They just needed someone to listen to their ideas and support them in implementing them." Robert shook his head in amazement. "James, in 1 month you've managed savings that would allow me to avoid all those layoffs. And there's even more potential. The structural changes I'm planning could generate even greater savings." Susan, the financial manager, spoke up. "James, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How did you learn all this? Your management techniques are more effective than many I've seen in expensive MBA courses." James smiled. "Susan, when you have to survive with limited resources, you learn to optimize everything. Every wasted penny makes a difference. Every inefficient process costs you money you don't have." "And you applied those principles here?" "Exactly. The principles of efficiency are the same, no matter the size of the operation." Richard spoke up. "James, I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but the results speak for themselves." "Thank you, Richard, and I want you all to know I'm learning a lot too. I've never had access to an operation of this complexity." Robert smiled. This was exactly the dynamic he had hoped for, a mutual exchange of knowledge and experience. "Everyone," said Robert, "I want to make something official. James is no longer a temporary consultant. I'm offering him a permanent position as Director of Human Resources." The room fell silent, followed by spontaneous applause. Even Michael clapped, genuinely pleased with the decision. "James," said Robert, "do you accept?" James took a deep breath. This was a moment he had dreamed of for 15 years. I accept, but on one condition. What is it? I want to implement a continuing education program for all employees, vocational courses, support for those who want to study, incentives for personal growth. How much would that cost? Asked Susan. Less than what we spend on employee turnover. Investing in employee growth is always cheaper than hiring and training new people. Robert nodded. Approved. Michael stood up. James, can I speak with you privately? They left the meeting room. James, I want to apologize, said Michael. I was prejudiced and disrespectful toward you from the start. Michael, you were protecting your family's company. I completely understand. No, it wasn't just that. It was prejudice. Plain and simple. I thought that because you were a street vendor, you couldn't possibly know about business management. James placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. Michael, prejudice is normal. We all have it. What matters is being willing to change when faced with evidence to the contrary. Like my father said, Michael smiled. Will you be my mentor in people management? I will, but only if you'll be my mentor in financial and strategic matters. Michael extended his hand. Deal. When they returned to the room, Robert was finishing explaining the company's expansion plans to the team. With the savings James has generated and the improved productivity, we can take on more projects without hiring additional staff. That means more profit to reinvest in the company and better conditions for everyone. That evening, Robert came home early and found Catherine and Emily watching TV. How was your day? Asked Catherine, still a bit cold due to the situation with James. Excellent. James has been promoted to HR director. Emily smiled. Congratulations, Dad. You bet on the right person. Catherine looked surprised. Already? It hasn't even been 2 months since he started. The results speak for themselves, Catherine. In 1 month, he saved the company more money than I did all last year. Emily grew curious. How did he do that? Robert explained all the changes James had implemented. The most impressive part, said Robert, is that he didn't change anything fundamental about operations. He just organized what was already there better and valued people more. Catherine shook her head. I admit I'm surprised. I didn't expect results this fast. And the best is yet to come. James has plans to expand these improvements. Emily stood up. Dad, can I visit the company one day? I want to see these changes in action. Of course. James will be happy to show you his work. Catherine hesitated for a moment, then asked, Robert, what if Emily worked at the company during her break, to learn about management before she goes to Italy? Robert was surprised by Catherine's suggestion. That's a great idea. Emily, would you like that? I'd love to, especially if I can work close to James. I want to learn about people management. Then it's settled. Next break, Emily works with us. A few months later, Emily was working at the company as an HR intern, learning directly from James. Catherine had reconciled with the situation and even begun to respect James after getting to know him personally. The company was thriving. Employees were happier and more productive. Clients praised the improved service quality. And Robert had found a satisfaction in his work he hadn't felt in years. One Saturday afternoon, Robert, Catherine, and Emily went to the park to visit James and Sarah, who had returned to working there on weekends for pleasure, not necessity. How's law school? Robert asked James. Great. Night classes fit perfectly with my schedule at the company, and it's rewarding to study formally what I learned in practice. Sarah smiled. James is at the top of his class. The professors are impressed by his practical knowledge. Emily was helping at the cart, just as she had the first day she met James. James, she said, you've taught me more about leadership in 3 months than any book or course. How so? You showed me that leading is serving. It's giving people the tools to be better, not just giving orders. Catherine, who was chatting with Sarah, walked over. James, I want to thank you, she said. Why, Mrs. Jenkins? For giving me my husband back. Robert is happier and more present at home since he started working with you. Robert was moved by his wife's words. Catherine, James didn't give me back. He helped me find myself. Mrs. Jenkins arrived just then to buy her usual snack. "Look at this gathering," she said, seeing the whole family together. "How are things, James?" "Very well, Mrs. Jenkins. And you?" "Wonderful. My grandson, the one you helped treat, is growing up strong and healthy." She turned to Robert. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you know what a treasure you have in James." "I know very well, Mrs. Jenkins, and I learn something new from him every day." Michael arrived at the park just then with his girlfriend. "Dad, I didn't know you'd be here." "Michael, this is Olivia," he introduced his girlfriend. "Olivia, these are my parents, my sister Emily, and this is James, our company's HR director." Olivia greeted everyone politely. "James, Michael talks about you a lot, says you revolutionized the company." "I didn't revolutionize anything," James replied modestly. "I just helped organize what was already there better." Michael shook his head. "James, stop being modest. You turned our company into one of the best places to work in the city." "It's true," Emily agreed. "Some of my friends want internships there because of the reputation the company has gained." Robert looked around. His family was gathered with James and Sarah in the same place where everything had begun just a few months ago. The contrast with that first day was striking. "James," Robert said, "can I make a confession?" "Of course. When I offered you that opportunity, I thought I was doing you a favor. Now I realize the one who was favored was me." "How so?" "You taught me that real success isn't just about money. It's about making a difference in people's lives. It's about building something worthwhile, not just something profitable." Sarah wiped away a tear. "Robert, when James came home that first day talking about you all, I was scared. Scared it was just a passing guilt. And now? Now I see it was destiny bringing together people who needed each other." James hugged his wife. "Sarah has always been right about these things." A group of young people approached the food cart. Robert recognized some as employees of the company. "Hi, James," one of them said. "We came to try our director's famous snacks." James smiled and began preparing the food. Robert watched as he treated each customer with the same care and warmth he showed at the company. "Dad," Emily said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever regretted changing the company?" Robert thought for a moment. "No, not for a second. The only thing I regret is taking so long to make those changes." Catherine approached James. "James, can I ask a favor?" "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. When Emily comes back from Italy, would you mentor her if she wants to work in people management?" James looked at Emily, who smiled hopefully. "It would be an honor. Emily has a natural talent for leadership." "It's true," Michael agreed. "She learned in 3 months what took me years to understand." Robert felt proud of his daughter and son. Both had grown from the experience. As James finished preparing the snacks, Jennifer arrived at the park with an envelope in her hand. "James, so good to see you. I have news for you." "What news, Councillor Jennifer?" Jennifer opened the envelope. "You passed the Bar Association exam with the highest score. Officially, you're a lawyer now." Silence was followed by cheers and applause. Sarah hugged James with tears in her eyes. "I knew you could do it," she said. Robert shook James's hand. "Congratulations, James Wilson. Esco." "Thank you, Robert, but I'll still just be James to all of you." Michael stepped forward. "James, now that you're a licensed attorney, does that mean you'll leave the company?" "I don't plan to, but maybe we can expand my role. I can handle legal matters in addition to human resources." "That would be perfect," Robert said. "Having an in-house labor law specialist will be a huge advantage." Emily hugged James. "I'm so proud of you. You proved it's never too late to achieve our dreams." Mrs. Jenkins, who had been watching everything, approached. "My dear, you deserve all the happiness in the world. I always knew you were special." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. None of this would be possible without all of your support." Robert looked around at everyone. Employees, family, friends from the park community, all united in celebrating James's achievement. "Everyone," Robert said, "I think this calls for a celebration. How about we throw a party at the company on Monday?" "Great idea," Michael agreed. "We can organize something special for all the employees. And invite the whole park community," Emily added. James was moved. "You don't need to do this." "Yes, we do," said Sarah. "You deserve to be celebrated for everything you've achieved." Jennifer approached Robert. "Robert, can I make a suggestion?" "Of course. Why don't you formalize a social inclusion program at the company? Hiring people in vulnerable situations and giving them real opportunities for growth?" Robert liked the idea. "James, what do you think?" "I think it would be a way to give back to the community, and I'm sure we'd find incredible talent." "Then let's do it. Jennifer, can you help us structure something legal and efficient?" "Absolutely." Catherine, who had overheard the conversation, stepped closer. "Robert, could this program include scholarships for underprivileged youth?" "It could." "Why?" "Because I want to contribute too. I can coordinate the educational side of the program." Robert was surprised and moved by his wife's proposal. "Catherine, it would be wonderful to have you involved." Emily clapped her hands. "Our whole family working on something that will help others. James, do you see what you've done? You didn't just change the company, you changed all of us." James hugged Emily tenderly. "Emily, the change was already in you. I just helped bring it out." The sun began to set in the park. People gradually said their goodbyes but agreed to meet on Monday to plan the party and discuss the new social program. Robert was the last to say farewell to James and Sarah. "James, I want you to know this was the best investment I've ever made in my life." "Robert, you didn't invest in me. You invested in doing the right thing, and that always brings the best returns." "You're right, and I hope our partnership lasts many years." "It definitely will. We have a lot of work ahead." Robert hugged James and Sarah. "See you Monday, James Wilson-Esker." "See you Monday, my friend Robert." The following Monday, Thompson & Associates Construction was decorated for James's graduation celebration. Employees, family, and friends from the community gathered to celebrate. During the party, Robert gave an emotional speech. "Friends, we're here to celebrate the graduation of James Wilson-Eskew. But in truth, we're celebrating much more than that. We're celebrating proof that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become a better person." Applause echoed through the room. "James taught me that real success isn't measured by what we gain, but by what we give. Not by the heights we reach, but by how many people we help climb with us." James was visibly moved. "That's why," Robert continued, "I want to officially announce the James Wilson Social Inclusion Program, which will provide job and educational opportunities for people in vulnerable situations." The applause grew even louder. James stood to speak. "Friends, when Robert offered me this opportunity months ago, I never imagined I'd get this far. But I've learned that when good people come together for just causes, there's no limit to what they can achieve." He looked at Sarah, who smiled with tears in her eyes. "I especially want to thank my wife, Sarah, who never let me give up on my dreams, and the Thompson family who gave me the chance to prove that everyone deserves a second opportunity." James paused, looking around at everyone present. "But most of all, I want to thank this community, which taught me that real wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we share." The applause lasted several minutes. When it finally quieted, Mrs. Jenkins stood up. "Can I say something?" she asked. "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins," Robert replied. "Do you know what the most beautiful thing about this whole story is?" "What?" asked Emily. "That no one here had to stop being who they were to become better. Robert stayed a businessman, but he became a better one. James remained a man of the people, but he also became a professional. Everyone grew without losing their essence." Mrs. Jenkins' words deeply moved everyone present. Sarah stood up and embraced Robert. "Thank you for giving my husband the chance he deserved." "Thank you for teaching me what truly matters in life," Robert replied. Michael approached James. "James, I want you to know I've learned more about leadership from you than in all my training. And I learned about strategic management from you, Michael. We make a good team." Emily ran to hug James. "When I return from Italy, I want to work on the social program. Will you teach me?" "It would be an honor, Emily." Jennifer joined the group. "Robert, I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "How about we document this entire experience? It could become a case study for other companies wanting to implement similar changes." "Excellent idea," James agreed. "If our experience can help others, we must share it." "Then it's settled," said Robert. We'll document everything and create a replicable model. Catherine joined them. And I'll coordinate the educational side, as we agreed. I already have ideas for partnerships with technical schools. Robert looked around. His company had transformed into a hub of opportunity and growth. His family had united for a greater cause, and he had found a purpose far beyond profit. James, Robert said, remember what you told me on the first day, that you forgave me not because I deserved it, but because you deserved peace. I remember. Well, now I understand what you meant. When we do the right thing, we find a peace money can't buy. James smiled. Robert, you found something even better than peace. You found purpose. The celebration lasted late into the night. Employees shared stories of how their lives had improved at the company. Community members spoke of how James had helped them over the years, and the Thompson family celebrated not just financial success, but personal growth above all. As the party ended and goodbyes were said, Robert and James stayed behind to tidy up. James, Robert said, can I ask one last question? Of course. Did you ever doubt this would work? James thought for a moment. Honestly? At first, yes. But then I realized it didn't matter if it worked. What mattered was that we were trying to do the right thing. And now? Now I know it succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. But the most important thing is we've created a model that can inspire others. Robert nodded. James, in 1 year, you've transformed my company, my family, and my life. How can I repay you? Robert, you already have. You gave me the chance to prove everyone deserves an opportunity. Now our responsibility is to ensure others get the same chance. Robert extended his hand. Partners for life. James shook it firmly. Partners for life. They left together, glancing back one last time before turning off the lights. The building that once symbolized only profit now stood for hope, opportunity, and transformation. Outside, they said goodbye once more. James, see you tomorrow to start the week. See you then. And Robert, thank you for being brave enough to change. Thank you for showing me change is possible. Robert drove home reflecting on everything that had happened. A year ago, he was a financially successful but emotionally empty businessman. Today, he was a fulfilled man who had found his true purpose. At home, he found Catherine and Emily in the living room, excitedly discussing plans for the social program. How was the farewell? Asked Catherine. Emotional, but it wasn't a goodbye. It was the start of a new chapter. Emily stood up and hugged her father. Dad, I'm proud of you. You proved it's never too late to be a better person. Robert hugged his daughter, feeling immense gratitude for having a family that supported him on his journey of growth. Emily, when you return from Italy, we'll build the largest social inclusion program this country has ever seen together. Is that a promise? It's a promise. Catherine stepped closer and hugged them both. Robert, thank you for including me in this project. It's been years since I've felt so useful and fulfilled. Catherine, we've always been a team. Now we're a team with purpose. They stood there, embracing, planning a future that went far beyond personal success, planning a future where their success would be measured by the number of lives they could positively touch. Meanwhile, across town, James and Sarah arrived home after the party. How do you feel, James Wilson Esker? Asked Sarah, teasing him with the new title. I feel grateful. Grateful that you believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Grateful that Robert had the courage to admit his mistakes. Grateful for everyone who supported us on this journey. Sarah hugged her husband. And I'm grateful to have a husband who never lost faith in people's goodness, even when they didn't deserve it. Sarah, do you think we changed the world? We didn't change the whole world, James, but we changed our little corner of it. And sometimes that's more important. James looked out the apartment window at the city lights. Tomorrow begins a new chapter. It's no longer about surviving or proving our worth. It's about using what we've learned to help others. And are you ready for that? James smiled, thinking of everything he'd achieved, but mostly of everything he still had to give. I'm ready. We're ready. They prepared for bed, knowing the next day would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. The next morning, Robert arrived early at the office and found James already working in his. "Good morning, James Wilson Eskint," said Robert, smiling. "Good morning, Robert. Ready for another day of changing the world?" "Always ready when I have the right partner." They sat down to review the week's plans. The company was growing, the social program was taking shape, and both knew their partnership had created something far greater than just a working relationship. "James," said Robert, "a year ago, if someone had told me my street vendor would become my business partner and best friend, I'd have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me the businessman who fired me would become the one to make my dreams come true, I'd have thought it impossible too. But it happened. It happened because we were both willing to change. You had the humility to admit your mistakes, and I had the wisdom to forgive." Robert nodded. "And now we have the responsibility to use our story to inspire others." "Exactly. How many other stories like ours could happen if more people had the courage to change? Let's find out. The social program will be our way to multiply those opportunities." They spent the morning working together, planning the future of the company and the social program. Every decision was made not just for profit, but for the positive impact they could create. That afternoon, Michael arrived with news. "Dad, James, I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" asked Robert. "I just got a call from a business association. They want you to speak about humanized management and social responsibility." James and Robert exchanged glances. "What do you think?" asked James. "I think it's our chance to start spreading the message," replied Robert. "Then we accept," said James. "But on one condition." "What?" "We want Sarah and Catherine to be part of this too. This story isn't just ours, it belongs to our whole family." Michael smiled. "Perfect, I'll check with them." When Michael left, Robert looked at James. "You realize there's no turning back now, right? We're officially advocates for human-centered management. And do you regret it?" Robert thought for a moment, remembering the man he had been a year ago. A successful but empty man, wealthy but poor in meaningful relationships. "Not one bit. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that truly matters." James smiled. "Robert, you know what the best part of this journey has been?" "What?" "Discovering that when you do the right thing for the right reasons, everyone wins. You gained a friend and a purpose. I gained a career and dignity. Our families gained unity and meaning. The employees gained better conditions, and the community gained proof that change is possible." Robert was moved by James's words. "And now we'll make sure other businesses and people get the same chance to grow." "Exactly. Our story is just the beginning." They returned to work, knowing every decision they made would impact countless lives. And for the first time, that didn't scare them. It motivated them even more. At the end of the day, Robert looked out his office window. Down below in the park, he could see the food cart where James had worked for so many years. Now it was run by another young man, trained and mentored by James before he took on his new role. "James," Robert called. "Yes?" "Thank you for teaching me that real success means creating opportunities for others, not just yourself. And thank you for proving that people can change when they find the right reasons to." They said goodbye once more, each heading home to their families and lives transformed by a simple choice to do what was right. As Robert drove home, he thought about the future. In a few months, Emily would return from Italy with fresh ideas for the social program. Catherine was becoming more involved in the educational side. Michael had grown into a more compassionate and aware leader, and James remained the same principled man as always, but now with the tools to amplify his impact. At home, he found Catherine reviewing proposals for vocational courses for the social program. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive. Michael secured an opportunity for us to speak about human-centered management." "Us? You, me, James, and Sarah. This story is yours too." Catherine smiled. "Robert, can I confess something?" "Of course. At first I thought you were having a midlife crisis. Now I see it was a wake-up call." Robert laughed. "Is there much difference between the two?" "A huge one. Crises pass. Wake-up calls change you forever." Robert hugged his wife. "Catherine, thank you for being patient with me through this transformation. Robert, thank you for including me in this journey. I hadn't felt this useful in years." Over dinner, they discussed plans for the coming week. Every project, every idea, every decision was weighed for the positive impact it could create. "Robert," Catherine said before bed, "do you think our story can really inspire others?" "I'm sure of it. If a stubborn businessman like me can change, anyone can. And if a street vendor like James can become a doctor and a company director, anyone can dream big." Exactly. Our story proves it's never too late to start over, never too late to do what's right, and never too late to become a better person. Catherine smiled and kissed her husband. "So tomorrow we'll keep changing the world, one day at a time. We will. Together." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this inspiring story of transformation and perseverance. Do you believe Robert made the right choice by giving James a second chance? And James, did he show wisdom in forgiving and moving forward? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think about this journey of personal and professional growth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories about overcoming challenges and changing lives.